Hi, I'm here at Clay Studio Santa Barbara and I'm going to show you the intro to glazing. So I'm out in our private outdoor glazing area where you can make appointments to come and have the whole space to yourself to glaze. And today I'm just going to be showing you the very basics to glazing, and I'm actually going to be glazing this small cup. So the first thing you want to do is having a bisqued piece of pottery, and you want to wipe it down with a very slightly damp sponge. You don't want to use something that's super soaking wet because it will clog all of the clay up and then it won't be able to absorb any glaze. And the reason that we do this is to make sure that there's no dust on the surface to block the glaze from getting into the bisqued piece. So I'm just using a slightly damp sponge, and you can see as I wipe it immediately sort of evaporates because it's just a bit damp. And I do the inside as well. And it's good to do this in the beginning so that while you pick and mix your glazes up, these can dry fully. So now I've gotten this guy nice and wiped down. I'm just gonna put it to the side. And I walked over before I started recording to our little glaze testing area. So all of our test tiles are there with the names of the glazes and on different clay bodies. So every glaze looks different on different clay bodies. So I selected the tiles that were of the same clay body as my piece and picked the glazes that I liked. I like to grab the tiles and put them in front of me so I know what I'm doing, and I like to line up if I'm glazing multiple pieces. I've glazed all of these pieces with this tile and then these with this color to keep things straight, because the glazes don't look the way they will once they're fired when you're using them in the buckets here. So I've selected a white and a turquoise color, and I'm gonna do the inside of my piece white. So I've got my test tile, I know what it is. I found the bucket, it's actually here. It's a big trash can full of it. And I'm going to start by mixing up this glaze. So glaze is comprised of powders mixed with water, and it settles over time, oftentimes very quickly depending on the glaze. So we have a bunch of stirring implements, and this is a really handy, ginormous whisk. And so I'm gonna make sure it's nice and clean before I put it in there. And I'm just gonna stir the glaze up. And you wanna make sure you're grabbing, sometimes there's chunks of things at the bottom. You wanna make sure you're mixing all of that up. So people have been glazing pretty recently, so it's not super settled, so I was able to do that pretty quickly. And then I'm going to take the whisk out, and we have a couple buckets out here of water that you can rinse your stirring implements out in. So I'm just gonna rinse that with some water, and then this is good to go. So for glazing a piece, I always start with the inside, because you can glaze the inside and then let that dry and then do the outside. So I'm starting with the inside, and I'm going to pour into this piece. So I have a clean pitcher, and I'm gonna grab the pitcher. You don't need a ton of glaze because you don't need to have it full. You'll be able to pour the glaze around. And I'm gonna pour it into this piece. And then when I'm not using the pitcher, I like to hang it on the side of the bin, because if you put it down, you're gonna get glaze everywhere. And also if you put it down it's with something else on it, you could contaminate the glaze. So I like to hang it on the side. And then I'm gonna take the piece and slowly rotate it to get it to coat the whole piece. Slowly rotating it to get all around the edges of the piece. And then when I'm happy with that, I just pour it back in there. And you can see I spilled a bit on the outside, so you can leave that and have a layered look, especially if you're gonna be using the same glaze, but I'm gonna actually take another sponge and just wipe that away quickly. And with water, glaze wipes off pretty easily. Certain ingredients in glazes are a little bit more stubborn, like an iron oxide, but with this glaze, it wasn't a big deal. So now I'm gonna want that inside glaze to dry a bit. So I'm gonna put it to the side and grab my next glaze. And some glazes are in these bigger trash cans. We have some in 5-gallon buckets and some in even smaller buckets. So it kind of depends on the glaze. And I'm going to be using this turquoise glaze, which is actually in a pretty small bucket, and it was only about halfway full, and I wanted to make sure it was deep enough to dip my piece in, so I actually decanted it into this larger pitcher so that the surface level is higher so I can dip my piece in it without worrying. So I've actually already mixed this up a little bit, but I'm gonna mix it again because glaze can settle very quickly. And I'm just using a wooden stick. So mixing it up nice and well, and I mixed it in the bucket before I poured it into this as well, to make sure I didn't leave anything at the bottom. I'm gonna put that to the side. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do the outside for a dip. You can hold it like this, and you'll get some finger marks. And in a lot of traditional ceramics, that's considered a maker's mark. It's a way of seeing that something was handmade and it has the mark of the maker on it. You can also do this, which is what I like to do, is you put your 2 fingers of each hand on the sides and pull tight for tension and dip it in. And you can also, depending on the shape of the piece, it's sometimes helpful to use these little grabbers, and you just open it up, grab the piece, hold tight, and you can dip it in like that. And you do sometimes get a tiny bit of mark, but it's very easy to conceal. So I'm just gonna use my hands. This is my favorite way to do it. And it helps to be able to see the side of the pot so you can see how far you're dipping it, but I'm just gonna push it in, hold it for 1 or 2 seconds. You don't wanna hold for too long because you could get the glaze on too thick and then it's likely to run or even flake off. And I'm letting it drip, and I like to put it directly onto a nice moist sponge. And then I actually just hold the sponge and twist the piece to get all the glaze off the bottom, and also to give myself a nice little ring. You want to give yourself about 1/4 of an inch at the bottom of the piece in case a glaze runs. And the more you glaze, the more familiar you'll get with certain glazes that might be more stable or more runny. And that just comes with time. But yeah, so I do that, and then you can see there's still some glaze on the bottom. And the reason we want to be super careful with that is because glaze will stick to the kiln shelf when it gets put in the kiln. And if that happens, we'll have to rip your piece off of the kiln shelf basically, and it can create sharp edges and really damage your pot. So if you want to have a nice piece come out, taking the time to make sure that all the glaze is wiped off of the bottom and there's a nice little ring. It's better to be safe than sorry for sure with this. So I'm just gonna make sure it's nice and clean. And I find this technique of twisting it gives you a pretty even level of a line versus like trying to wipe carefully around the edges. And then you can also wax your pieces beforehand, which is brushing on wax. We actually have some here. There's various different kinds of wax resist, but you would wax your bottoms of your pots beforehand, and then the glaze would resist off of the wax. And then you'd wipe any residual glaze off. And you can do that. It's something you can do ahead of time before coming here, or in the very beginning before you get started with glazing. But if you're just doing a couple things, or you just don't mind wiping, this is totally a good technique to use. And then the last thing I like to do is, because of the way I dipped it, the lip, when you pour and then dip, the lip is left. So I sometimes like to go back in with my inside or outside glaze, whatever you prefer. Make sure this is clean. And I stir it back up again. Maybe I should put my pot down. And I'm just gonna put it in upside down to get that lip, have the lip have some glaze on it. And I did overlap it a bit so that the glazes might do something cool interacting. It's something, again, you can get to know the glazes and know what glazes interact well. And that is pretty much it. So when I'm done with my piece, I'll put it over to my right where our glaze pieces go before they're fired into the kiln. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you guys soon.